The sun was setting over the historic rooftops of Milan, casting golden shadows on the roof of the Palazzo Vittoria, where Alessandro Conti, one of the most influential businessmen in the Italian fashion industry, gazed out over the city, lost in thought, holding a glass of Brunello di Montalcino. At 45 years of age, his imposing and elegant figure concealed a pain that had been consuming him for exactly 7 years, 3 months and 15 days. On the wall of his private office, a gold-framed photograph showed a stunning young woman, Valentina Rossi, his missing fiancée. The portrait had been taken during the latest fashion show of his luxury brand, just 3 days before her mysterious disappearance. Her honey-colored eyes and radiant smile continued to haunt Alessandro's dreams. The fashion empire built by Alessandro, valued at more than 2 billion euros, seemed empty without Valentina. She was not only his fiancée, but also his creative director and his soulmate. Her disappearance on the eve of the wedding generated headlines across Europe, conspiracy theories, and an investigation that consumed millions, but produced not a single concrete lead. That autumn night in Milan, Alessandro was getting ready for another charity event at the Teatro alla Scala. As president of the Conti Foundation, dedicated to helping disadvantaged children, he maintained the appearance of a successful philanthropist, even though inside he was devastated. His driver, Marco, a discreet gentleman who'd been working for the family for decades, was waiting for him with the black Maserati Quattroporte at the entrance of the building. On the way to the theater, Alessandro absently reviewed some documents. When a traffic jam forced the car to stop near the Piazza del Duomo, it was then that his world fell apart. Among the tourists and passers-by, a familiar figure caught his attention. A ragged woman, sitting on the sidewalk with 2 small, identical girls, no more than 6 years old. Alessandro's heart skipped a beat. Even under the dirty clothes and weather-beaten face, he would recognize those honey-colored eyes anywhere in the world. It was Valentina, his Valentina. But what struck him most were the 2 girls next to her, 2 spitting images of her who, if his calculations were correct, would have been conceived shortly before her disappearance. "Marco, stop the car! Stop the car now!" shouted Alessandro, his voice trembling with a mixture of emotions that even he could not decipher. But by the time Marco managed to stop the vehicle, the woman and the children had disappeared into the crowd, leaving on the ground a small wooden rosary, identical to the one Alessandro had given to Valentina the day he proposed to her. Alessandro took the rosary with trembling hands, feeling the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. Why had Valentina disappeared? Why did she live like a beggar? And those girls, were they her daughters? The answer to these questions would lead him on a journey far darker than he could have imagined, unearthing secrets that perhaps would have been better left buried. The discovery of Valentina unleashed an obsession in Alessandro. Over the following days, he practically took up residence in his office in the Palazzo Vittoria, transforming the elegant space into an improvised research center. City maps covered the marble walls. Red markers indicated every place where beggars used to congregate in Milan. His private security team, led by Franco Ricci, a former Italian policeman, scoured every alley and square in the city. During this frantic search, Alessandro discovered something disturbing. In the archives of the original investigation, a folder containing documents relating to Lorenzo Moretti, his former partner and best friend, had mysteriously disappeared. Curiously, Lorenzo left the company 2 weeks after Valentina's disappearance, selling his shares for a fraction of their real value. One particularly frustrating night, Isabella, his housekeeper for 20 years, brought him some information that made his blood run cold. "Signor Conti, forgive me for not telling you before, but The night before Signorina Valentina disappeared, I saw her leave Signor Lorenzo's office. She was crying, and he was shouting something about consequences. Isabella's revelation opened Pandora's box. Alessandro began digging through old financial records and discovered suspicious transfers of large sums to an account in the Cayman Islands, all signed by Lorenzo, but using Valentina's personal password. The transactions began 3 months before her disappearance. Meanwhile, the twins' scene with Valentina became an even greater obsession. Alessandro hired facial recognition experts to analyze the few blurry images he obtained from the security cameras in the square. The result was unequivocal. A 99.9% genetic similarity between him and Valentina. The investigation led Alessandro to uncover a network of clandestine clinics in the suburbs of Milan. In one of them, a retired nurse recognized Valentina in a photo. Yes, the young pregnant woman. She was here a few months ago. She was hiding from someone. She was very scared. She ran away one night after a well-dressed man showed up looking for her. Each discovery led to more questions, and each answer seemed darker than the last. Alessandro began to realize that Valentina's disappearance was not a simple case of abandonment, but part of something much bigger and more sinister. The last straw came when Franco discovered that Lorenzo had bought an old villa on the outskirts of Florence at the exact moment Valentina disappeared. Even more intriguing, the electricity and water bills indicated constant movement in the property during the first 3 years after the purchase, even though Lorenzo supposedly lived in Dubai during that period. Alessandro felt his world collapse. For a second time when his private investigator found the hospital records of a clinic in Florence. Twins had been born there exactly 7 years ago. The mother's name was false, but the description matched Valentina perfectly. Most disturbing was that the doctor responsible for the delivery had died in a car accident 2 weeks later. The puzzle was starting to come together, but the pieces revealed a picture that Alessandro could hardly bear. His empire, his fortune, his supposed best friend. It all seemed to be part of an elaborate web of lies and betrayals that had cost Valentina and his daughters 7 years of his life. The search for the truth forced Alessandro to reevaluate all the relationships in his life. The first person he confronted was his own mother, Sofia Conti, a Milanese aristocrat who had never fully approved of his relationship with Valentina, considering her unsuitable for the family. "Mom, did you know anything about Lorenzo and Valentina?" The question echoed in the Conti Villa's dining room during Sunday lunch. Sofia dropped her silver fork, and her normally impassive face betrayed a moment of turmoil. "Alessandro, dear, there are things from the past that are better left unsaid." His mother's evasive response only increased his suspicions. Through conversations with former employees, Alessandro discovered that Sofia had met secretly with Lorenzo several times in the weeks leading up to Valentina's disappearance. Maria, Valentina's former personal assistant and her best friend, also had secrets. When pressed, she finally broke down in tears. Valentina discovered something terrible about the company's finances. She came to see me, terrified, saying that Lorenzo was involved in money laundering. She had evidence, Alessandro, but she was afraid to tell you because... Maria hesitated, but Alessandro insisted. Because Lorenzo threatened to reveal that his father, before he died, had left the company on the brink of bankruptcy. All the investments that saved Conti Fashion came from suspicious sources. Valentina discovered that you could lose everything. If the truth was discovered, the revelation hit Alessandro like a punch in the face. His father, the great Giacomo Conti, had always been his hero, his role model of integrity. The idea that his legacy was tainted by corruption was devastating. Franco, his head of security, provided another piece of the puzzle. He had located Carmen, Lorenzo's former housekeeper, who was living in a nursing home on the outskirts of Milan. The old woman revealed that in the first months after Valentina's disappearance, Lorenzo received frequent visits from a private doctor. He came with medicine. Sometimes I heard screams coming from the basement. One night, I heard a baby crying. Alessandro's relationships with his management team also began to unravel. He discovered that several directors had been silent accomplices, accepting bribes to ignore Lorenzo's suspicious activities. Giancarlo, his finance director for 15 years, was found dead in his flat days after Alessandro began his investigation. An apparent suicide that raised new suspicions. The only person Alessandro still trusted was Isabella, his housekeeper. It was she who, risking her own safety, managed to get in touch with a former nurse who had cared for Valentina during her pregnancy. Your fiancée resisted bravely, Signor Alessandro. She refused to sign the documents Lorenzo demanded, even under threat. She said she would rather die than betray you. Each new revelation brought Alessandro closer to the truth, but also distanced him from the people he considered family. He realized that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. Meanwhile, somewhere in Milan, Valentina and her daughters, his daughters, were still living as homeless people, and time was running out. Fate chose a rainy October afternoon to change everything. Alessandro was in his office, examining the case documents for the 1000th time, when he received an anonymous call. An electronically distorted voice whispered, "Palazzo Abbandonato, Via dei Sospiri, midnight. Come alone if you want to. Know the truth about Valentina." Against all Franco's advice, Alessandro decided to go. The Palazzo Abbandonato was an old historic building in the suburbs of Milan, abandoned for decades. When he arrived, he didn't find his mysterious informant, but Valentina herself, even thinner and more emaciated than the last time he had seen her in the square. "Alessandro." Her voice was barely a hoarse whisper. "You shouldn't have come." Before he could react, bright lights flooded the room. Lorenzo emerged from the shadows, accompanied by 2 armed men. But the real surprise came when Sofia Conti, Alessandro's mother, appeared at his side. "Son," said Sofia with calculated coldness, "you have always been as idealistic as your father. That has always been your greatest flaw." It was then that the true story began to unfold. Conti fashion had been built not only on hard work, but also on decades of money laundering for the Italian mafia. Giacomo Conti, Alessandro's father, had tried to break those ties before his accidental death. "Your father was weak," Lorenzo continued. "Like you. Valentina found out everything and threatened to expose our operation. We couldn't allow that. The girls," Alessandro began, but Valentina interrupted him with tears in her eyes. "They're your daughters, Alessandro. I found out I was pregnant the same week I found the incriminating documents. Lorenzo and his mother gave me a choice: disappear with the girls or see you destroyed and possibly killed." Alessandro's world was spinning. His own mother had conspired to separate him from his family, all to protect a criminal empire. The twins, his daughters, had grown up on the streets while he lived in luxury, oblivious to everything. But Lorenzo had made a fatal mistake that night. Confident in his power, he did not realize that Alessandro was not really alone. Franco and his team had traced the anonymous call and, at that very moment, agents of the Guardia di Finanza, the Italian financial police, surrounded the building. Chaos ensued, swift and violent. Shots were fired in the darkness. Alessandro shielded Valentina with his own body, while Lorenzo tried to escape. In the confusion, Sofia Conti vanished like a ghost in the night, leaving behind a briefcase full of documents that would incriminate everyone involved in the criminal plot. When the dust had settled, Lorenzo was in handcuffs, but the price had been high. Alessandro had been shot in the shoulder, and Valentina was in a state of shock, muttering repeatedly about the twins she had left hidden in a convent on the outskirts of the city. That night had changed everything. The Conti empire, built on lies and crime, was about to crumble. But for Alessandro, who was embracing Valentina after 7 years apart, the only thing that mattered was making up for lost time with his family. The following months were the most difficult of Alessandro's life. After being discharged from hospital, his first mission was to rescue the twins Sofia and Luna from the Convento delle Grazie. The encounter was emotionally devastating. The girls, although they lived in modest conditions in the care of the nuns, maintained an impressive dignity and intelligence. Papa, the word, timidly uttered by Sofia, the eldest of the twins by 3 minutes, brought Alessandro to his knees. Valentina had spoken to the girls about their father all these years, keeping alive the hope of a reunion. The adaptation was not easy. The twins, accustomed to the simple life of the convent, were initially frightened by the grandeur of the Palazzo Vittoria. Valentina, for her part, suffered from severe post-traumatic stress and would often wake up at night screaming, reliving the moments of captivity. Alessandro completely transformed his life and his business. His first decision was to voluntarily hand over all the records of his illicit activities to the authorities. This meant losing 70% of the Conti empire, but he was determined to rebuild it all legitimately. "I don't want our daughters to inherit an empire built on crime," he told Valentina during a particularly difficult night as she struggled through another anxiety attack. The Italian press followed the family's every move. Some called him a fool for sacrificing so much money, others hailed him as a hero. But it was his decision to transform the Conti Foundation into an organization dedicated to helping families separated by violence and organized crime that really began to change the narrative. Valentina, always the stronger of the two, even after all the trauma, began her own journey of healing by helping other women who had been through similar situations. She turned her experience into strength, creating a program of psychological and financial support for victims of extortion and human trafficking. The twins, meanwhile, flourished under the love and care of their reunited parents. Luna developed an extraordinary talent for music, while Sofia showed a natural aptitude for the visual arts, both characteristics inherited from Valentina. The search for Sofia Conti continued, now led by Interpol. The betrayal of the family matriarch had left deep scars, especially on Alessandro, who needed months of therapy to process his own mother's part in the whole nightmare. Lorenzo, awaiting trial in a maximum security prison, tried several times to negotiate his freedom by offering information on other criminal plots. But Alessandro was determined. Justice would be done by legal means. "Sometimes I think we have lost a lot of time," said Valentina one night, as she watched the twins sleeping in each other's arms. "But then I realized that every moment of suffering has brought us this far. It has made us stronger." The most significant transformation, however, occurred in the very essence of Alessandro. The ruthless businessman gave way to a more humane, more conscious man. He learned to value simple moments, the laughter of little girls at breakfast, family movie nights, Valentina's small daily achievements in her recovery. Conti Fashion, now operating on a smaller but completely clean scale, began to rebuild itself under new principles. Alessandro implemented policies of total transparency and ethical practices that have become a benchmark in the Italian fashion market. Fate chose the twins' 7th birthday to bring about the final confrontation. The party was taking place in the gardens of the Palazzo Vittoria, with dozens of children running around and laughing when Isabella ran into Alessandro's office. "Sir," "She's here," whispered the pale housekeeper. "Your mother, Sophia, is at the door." Alessandro found his mother elegantly dressed as always, but visibly dejected. Next to her, two suspicious-looking men stood at attention. Before Alessandro could react, Valentina appeared, standing next to her husband. "I have come to meet my granddaughters," Sophia declared with her characteristic arrogance, "and to make one last proposition to them." What followed was a bombshell revelation. Sophia had for years documented all the illegal activities, not only of the Conti family, but of dozens of other powerful families in Milan. She offered all the documentation in exchange for protection and immunity. "Do you really think you can show up here after everything you've done and negotiate?" Valentina's voice trembled with rage. "You took my daughters away from me." It was at that moment that Sophia and Luna, curious about the commotion, slipped away from the party and approached. Sophia was transfixed when she saw her granddaughters for the first time. They were the perfect image of Alessandro and Valentina together. "Our daughters will grow up knowing exactly who you are," Alessandro declared, his voice full of determination. "Not because of your lies, but because of the truth you tried to bury." At that very moment, police cars surrounded the scene. Franco, who had notified the authorities as soon as they saw Sophia, coordinated the operation discreetly so as not to alarm the party guests. "You have a choice, mother," said Alessandro. "Surrender voluntarily and cooperate with the authorities, or you will be hunted down for the rest of your days. But know that you will never come near my family again." What no one expected was Sophia's reaction. In a moment of desperation, she drew a gun, aiming not at Alessandro or Valentina, but at herself. "You don't understand, son. They're going to kill me anyway. The organization doesn't allow traitors. It all happened in seconds." One of the men accompanying Sophia tried to disarm her, but she was faster. The shot echoed through the gardens, spreading panic among the guests. Sophia fell, not dead, but seriously injured, while Isabella and the security team took the children. Inside the house, Alessandro hugged his mother with tears in his eyes. "Why, Mom? Why did you choose this path?" "Power," she whispered as the ambulance approached. "Power has always been my only religion. Forgive me, figlio mio." As Sophia fought for her life in San Rafael Hospital, a surprising discovery completely changed the course of history. Among the documents seized from her was a detailed diary of Giacomo Conti, Alessandro's father, which revealed an even darker truth than anyone could have imagined. The diary revealed that weeks before his death, Giacomo had discovered that Sophia was not just an accomplice in the money laundering plot. She was the real mastermind of the whole criminal operation, manipulating not only Lorenzo, but also an extensive network of international criminals. Even more disturbing, Giacomo's death was no accident. Sophia had eliminated him when he threatened to expose everything. The diary ended with a letter addressed to Alessandro. "My son, if you are reading this, it means that I was unable to stop your mother. Forgive me for not being strong enough to protect our legacy." Valentina, upon reading the documents, made a devastating connection. "Alessandro, do you remember that trip to Paris 2 weeks before our wedding? Your mother insisted so much that I go." The trip had been a trap. It was during those days that Sophia planted false documents on Valentina's computer, incriminating her in a scheme of embezzlement. Lorenzo's discovery of those documents was no coincidence. It had all been meticulously orchestrated by Sophia. "She didn't just want to get rid of me," Valentina realized, shuddering. "She needed a scapegoat in case the plan was discovered." Detective Franco provided another surprising revelation. Sophia's secret bank accounts did not contain millions, but billions of euros distributed in tax havens around the world. Conti fashion had been nothing more than a front for one of the biggest money laundering operations in Europe. The twins, realizing the tension in the air, began to ask more difficult questions. "Daddy, why did Nonna want to hurt your chest?" asked Luna, with the innocence of her 7 years. Alessandro realized that he could not protect his daughters from the truth forever. It was Sophia, the more perceptive of the twins, who asked the question that would change everything. "Daddy, if Nonna hurt so many people, why did she cry when she saw us?" This simple question led Alessandro to re-examine years of memories. He recalled moments of true tenderness from his mother before power and greed consumed her. He realized that Sophia, in her last act, had not attacked the children or Valentina. She had chosen to hurt herself, perhaps her first act of protecting the family in decades. In the hospital, while Sophia fought for her life, a nurse found an envelope addressed to the twins, written years before. Inside, in addition to a letter confessing all their crimes, there was a key and GPS coordinates that would lead to an even more shocking revelation, one that would change not only the fate of the Conti, but that of all of Milan. The coordinates led Alessandro and Franco to an old World War II bunker deep beneath Milan. What they found there was much more than material treasure. It was decades of Italian high society's secrets. Sophia had kept meticulous records of every crime, every bribe, every murder ordered by Milan's elite. Her mother wasn't just a criminal, explained prosecutor Giuseppe Rossi, leafing through the documents. She was an archivist of the underworld. She kept information on everyone as a guarantee of her own survival. Sophia survived in hospital but was paralyzed from the waist down. Her formal confession, recorded in her hospital bed, lasted 3 days. She revealed a web of corruption reaching up to the Italian government, implicating judges, politicians, and powerful businessmen. Valentina, displaying a strength that surprised everyone, visited Sophia in the hospital. "I haven't come for you," she said firmly. "I've come so that you realize what you've lost. Your granddaughters will grow up knowing that wrong decisions have consequences, but also that forgiveness is possible, even if we don't deserve it." Justice was relentless. Lorenzo was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Sophia, due to her cooperation and her state of health, was sentenced to perpetual house arrest under 24-hour surveillance. The criminal empire she had built collapsed, taking dozens of powerful families with it. Alessandro turned tragedy into purpose. Conti Fashion was completely restructured, becoming a pioneer in ethical business practices. Part of the profits went to fund rehabilitation programs for families affected by organized crime. The twins, Sophia and Luna, grew up understanding the weight of their surname, but also its transformative power. Under their parents' guidance, they learned that true legacy lies not in wealth or power, but in the decisions we make. Valentina found her calling helping other women escape abusive situations. Her personal experience became a source of inspiration for many who thought there was no way out. One autumn afternoon, 5 years after the events that changed their lives, the Conti family gathered in the garden of the Palazzo Vittoria. The twins, now 12 years old, played the piano, a song they had composed themselves called Forgiveness. Alessandro looked at his family, reflecting on how the greatest tragedies can lead to the greatest redemption. Valentina, noticing his pensive gaze, approached him. "Do you know what I have learned in all these years?" she said softly. "That sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters." The story of the Conti family became a powerful reminder that true power does not lie in money or influence, but in the ability to choose love over revenge, truth over lies, and family above all else. 10 years have passed since that afternoon. In the garden, Milan has changed, the Contis have changed, but some things have remained intact, such as the love that kept the family together. Sophia and Luna, now 17, have grown into extraordinary young women. Sophia followed in her father's business footsteps, but with a vision of sustainability and social responsibility. Luna, meanwhile, developed a music therapy program for traumatized children, inspired by her own healing journey. Sofia Conti died under house arrest 3 years after her confession, leaving a final letter to Alessandro. "Son, you have achieved what I never could, to build an empire based on love, not fear. Your daughters are my only redemption." Conti Fashion, under the joint direction of Alessandro and Valentina, became a Harvard case study on the ethical transformation of companies. The couple created the Renaissance Foundation, which has already helped more than 1,000 families rebuild their lives after situations of violence and organized crime. Lorenzo, who is still serving his sentence, devoted himself to writing a book denouncing the mechanisms of organized crime, collaborating with the authorities to prevent other families from being destroyed as the Conti almost were. One special morning, during the twins' graduation from high school, Valentina found an old wooden rosary, the same one that Alessandro had found that fateful night in the square. He made 2 bracelets out of it, one for each daughter, symbolizing how even the greatest pain can be transformed into something beautiful. The Vittoria Palace, once a symbol of power and opulence, became a cultural center where young artists could develop their talent. The gardens, where Sofia had made her last desperate attempt, now resonated with the laughter of children during Luna's music classes. Alessandro and Valentina renewed their wedding vows in the same place where they met again that rainy night, transforming the Palazzo Abbandonato into a support center for women in vulnerable situations. The story of the Conti continues to be told in Milan, no longer as a story of power and tragedy, but as a testimony to the transformative power of love, truth, and redemption. One quiet afternoon, watching his daughters play the piano in the garden, Alessandro whispered to Valentina, "Did you know that after all we've been through, I still fall in love with you every day?" Valentina smiled, taking his hand. "It's because we've learned the hard way that true love isn't just about happy moments, but about choosing to stay, even when it would be easier to leave." And so, under the starry sky of Milan, the Conti family continued to write their story, no longer prisoners of the past, but architects of a future built on the foundations of love, truth, and forgiveness.